Okay, today I want to take some time and go over chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby. It's really the introduction chapter where we get to see Nick for the first time and we get to see Daisy and Tom and we meet Jordan. So it's sort of an important chapter to go over and kind of just look at all of the different characters. So make sure you have your book out because we're going to take a little bit of time and read a specific section in the book, kind of one of the more famous quotes from the book. So make sure you have your book out and your book is with you. Okay. So we're really looking at all of the characters. I've pulled, all of them from the movie, so they look fancy, all these pictures do. But we're going to start with Nick. We read a little bit together yesterday about Nick when he tells us about himself. He's right there. It's a great picture of him, Spider-Man. If you weren't sure who Nick was in the movie, it's Tobey Maguire, so Spider-Man, that's nice. But Nick tells us that he comes east to be a bondman, and that he was in World War I, and when he came out from World War I, that he was feeling a little bit restless. So he didn't want to stay in the Middle East. He wanted to go out. Or he didn't want to stay in the Middle West, excuse me. He didn't want to stay in the Middle West, and he wanted to go out east where there was a lot of action and there was a lot of things going on, and he decided he could go and be a bondman. That would be a job for him to do. He could learn how to do that. And so that's one of the reasons he comes to New York. And we had that great first quote that sort of frames the entire novel. And remember, it said, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, this is something that Nick's father told him. Just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. And so right off the bat that we know that, number one, Nick has had some advantages. That's probably one of the reasons why he tells you to quote to begin with, is he's trying to impress you in this first chapter, and he wants you to know that he comes from something, that his name means something, that he was born with some sort of class. And so he's had some advantages, and so because of that, he's supposed to stop and just not judge other people because he doesn't really fully understand what going through a struggle is. What we know about Nick is that there's no way that's going to happen. He's going to criticize everything. He's not the best at sort of being non-judgmental. He kind of tells you that he is in that one statement that, that's why I reserve judgments, except, he goes immediately after that and tells you how when people would come to him with problems where he's supposed to not be critical and not criticize them, he often, grew annoyed and bored, and he says specifically that he feigned sleep, preoccupation, and hostile levity. He talks about, all of the things that he used to do. And I love that great line that people thought he was a politician. So he must have known something about people, their secrets. And what do politicians, stereotypically do with secrets? They hold them against other people. So I don't know if I necessarily believe that Nick is going to be that, fair and that non-judgmental, especially in the first two paragraphs of the novel. I can see that he's sort of lying about it. And that's something to really, if you're Fitzgerald and you're trying to set up a narrator that your audience has to kind of see through, this is a great way that we see that happening. And he says that fundamental decencies are parceled out unequally at birth, that somehow you're just born with the ability to, it's a lot about the name, who he is, and who, I don't know what that did. Okay. Who he is, where he comes from. That's what that sort of decencies, the fundamental decencies are parceled out unequally at earth. I don't want to turn my firewall on. Okay. That's annoying. We'll hope that doesn't do that anymore. He tells us, right after that, he sort of tells us he's a descendant from a duke, so he's kind of proving to you that he's more high-bred, that he's higher class, that somehow he should be respected more because of where he came from. But then he has to sort of tell us like how his family really made their money, because it certainly wasn't handed down from generation to generation to generation like an old money would be. It's newer. They had to make it through sending somebody to fight the war for them during the Civil War. So it should sort of tell you a little bit about patriotism. We should, as an audience, be feeling something about that, to like know that they didn't actually sacrifice anything during the Civil War, the war that sort of, made our country in some ways. It was very, an important war to Americans. So that they sort of opted out of that. Should tell you just a little bit about their family, and we're supposed to, as readers, pick up on that. Even though Nick maybe wants us to only remember the fact that he's supposed to come from royalty and that he went to Yale, as readers, Fitzgerald is expecting us to pick up that small Civil War knock there. And also the next line in there in the paragraph says, I'm supposed to look like my uncle. So he sort of has a physical connection to this uncle who sort of swindled cheated his way out of participating in something and kind of took a back seat. And so that maybe should give us some insight as to what Nick is going to be like as well. So the real question is, like, what does Nick really want you to know about himself if he tells you all of these things? And I'm hoping that you're kind of piecing these things together, that he wants you to think that he comes from something good, that his name is good, that who he is should be respected, and that he isn't some piece of trash, really, ultimately. We're going to talk a lot about money and like what does money allow you to do, and does money give you respect? Does money make you a better person? And what the characters sort of believe about money and how that plays into like breeding in a way, like, being well bred. We get to meet Daisy. Now I'm going to introduce the characters in sort of an out of order way here. I just want to kind of go through them. And I'm going to talk about Daisy first. It's really her dinner party. It's Tom and Daisy. Daisy is Nick's cousin, but they don't really know each other very well. She's from the South. She's from Louisville. Every character kind of has a quality about them that's sort of, their power, I would say, if you want to say it like that. And hers is her voice. Like, she relies on this voice, which is sort of represents all femininity, like her sort of feminine charms to really like control the situations around her and to get what she wants. Everybody sort of has something that they lean on or that they rely on in this novel that helps them get their own way. And Daisy's for sure is her voice. We're going to constantly hear about how charming her voice is or what her voice sounds like. It's going to be described over and over to us. And our goal then is really, because it's so heavily put into this first chapter, that we have to look for those through the rest of the novel. Fitzgerald is really setting it up in this first chapter so you as the reader understand that the voice is important, and so when you hear it or it's referenced in the rest of the chapters, it should be a kind of a red flag for you to think about, what is Daisy really doing here? What is her motivation behind the action that's happening? So if she's like bringing out her power move, her voice, something has to be happening at that moment. And Fitzgerald's laying that groundwork now by giving you these like really dense paragraphs sort of back to back that describe her voice and the power she has. She's tired of really living this sort of meaningless life. She resorts to gossiping. As soon as the telephone rings and the butler leaves, the first thing she does is she gossips about the butler. She talks about, oh, did you hear about his nose and the polishing? And so she doesn't have a lot necessarily going on for her, except maybe living through other people's lives. Like, what drama is in her life that she can really talk about and get excited about and play a role in? She has everything. What do you do when you have everything? Like, how do you make your life interesting when you always get whatever you want? It sounds like a really great thing to get everything all the time and to be able to live like that. But at some point, if you don't have anything to want, anything to dream, any hopes, it's like your life is sort of meaningless in a way. It's pointless. So how do you create meaning in the world around you? And that's something Daisy and Tom both struggle with. She doesn't seem to be interested in her child too much. She sort of kind of passes her off. Pammy is her name. Pammy. But she's mentioned we need to know that Daisy has a child. She becomes important later on in the book. And I want to really take some time and focus on this quote right here. And this is the time I want you to grab your book. So if you can get your book. Now, I didn't bring my book home, so I need you to sort of figure out the page number of where I'm going through. So I'm going to kind of switch backgrounds here. And it's towards the end of chapter 1. It's maybe, I don't know. I'm going to put this down on the side here for just a moment so I can swap. It's maybe, let me think, the second to last page of the chapter where she's talking about her child. And so if you can find that, take a moment and find where she starts talking about the day her child is born. I want us to reread that section. I'll get it set up here. You find it in the book. Okay, and I'm going to start kind of, if you can see this, right there. I don't know why it's a little blurry. It's kind of driving me crazy, but maybe if I go down, come back up. There, that's a little better. Oh, and look at her voice saying. We were just talking about her voice. It's just so overdone in this chapter that there's just no way we can ignore it. All right, so we're going to go here. Now, what's interesting is so far in this chapter, the telephone has rang, and we understand that it's Tom's mistress that's on the phone. And we know that Daisy knows it's the mistress, right? She leaves the porch and she goes in because she's trying to get Tom to come off the phone. And Jordan and Nick have this conversation. And, Jordan's like, I thought everybody knew. I thought everybody knew that Tom is like cheating on Daisy. So when they come back out of, after this phone call, the only thing that's on anybody's mind is the fact that Tom just got off the phone with his mistress and that Tom is cheating on Daisy. Like every single person knows about this at the party. So imagine you're Daisy. Like, how do you deal with that when you look around the room and you see every single person at your dinner party is thinking about one thing, and that's your husband cheating on you? That has to be kind of hard to deal with. So they go on a walk. Nick and Daisy end up going on this walk. And this is sort of kind of a really important scene that we can't forget about through the rest of this novel. Like, this should always be in the back of our mind, this one scene. So I want to read it. I'm assuming at this point you have found it. So just sort of follow along with me in your books in this one scene. I'm going to start right here. She says, "We don't know each other very well, Nick," she said suddenly. "Even if we are cousins, you didn't come to my wedding." "I wasn't back from the war." "That's true." She hesitated. "Well, I've had a very bad time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything." Evidently she had reason to be. I waited, but she didn't say more, and after a moment I returned rather feebly to the subject of her daughter. "I suppose she talks and eats and everything?" "Oh, yes." She looked at me absently. "Listen, Nick, let me tell you." Oh, it's like I don't know what I'm doing. "Listen, Nick, let me tell you what I said when she was born. Would you like to hear?" "Very much." "It'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things. Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. I woke up out of the ether with an utterly abandoned feeling and asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl. And so I turned my head away and wept. 'All right,' I said. 'I'm glad it's a girl. And I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool.' You see, I think everything's terrible anyhow." she went on in a convinced way. Everybody thinks so, the most advanced people. And I know. I've been everywhere and seen everything and done everything. Her eyes flashed around her in a defiant way, rather like Tom's, and she laughed with thrilling scorn. Sophisticated! God, I'm sophisticated! The instant her voice broke off, ceasing to compel my attention, my belief, I felt the basic insincerity of what she had said. It made me uneasy, as though the whole evening had been a trick of some sort to exact a contributory emotion from me. I waited, and sure enough, in a moment she looked at me with an absolute smirk on her lovely face, as if she had asserted her membership in a rather distinguished secret society to which she and Tom belonged. That's such an important quote for this book, and there's a lot going on to it. So I want you to take a moment, and we're going to unpack it, and I want you to talk about the first part where she says that she hopes her child is a beautiful little fool. Why would Daisy want her child, her girl, to be a beautiful little fool? Why does she want her to be foolish? Think a little bit about Daisy's life and what Daisy is going through right now, and why would it make sense if her child is foolish? So just take a moment, talk to each other. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to see what you can come up with. Talk and see, what you can think. When we think about Daisy, we have to think it's the 1920s. She's married to the richest man that anybody would probably have been able to meet in real life at that time. He comes from a really good family. What are her options? Can she divorce him? In the 1920s? It's not that divorce was unheard of in the 1920s. It's just that it would kind of damage you as a woman to some extent. And she has a daughter. Is she going to get married again with a daughter in the 1920s? So when if you think about if she wants to have this daughter who's a fool, in some ways she's asking that, so when her daughter grows up and marries and the husband cheats on her, she won't be able to really understand it, and she won't know it, and she won't be hurt. And when I think about that, even though Daisy really, really wants you to believe that she is this vapid, sort of shallow, doesn't care about anything person, if she's making this comment that she wants her daughter to be a fool, it has to tell us that she's not. She's not the fool she portrays herself to be, of this silly woman, who just sits around and doesn't do anything all day. And we can't forget that she's smarter than she lets on, and she must be hurt if she wants her child to be foolish in a way that she doesn't know what's going on around her. So she must be hurt by Tom's actions. There's this great line when she's describing right when the baby was born. She says she was less than an hour old and Tom was God knows where. Well, I think we know where he was. This cannot be the first time that Tom has cheated on her. Where would he be? He had to have been with another woman, and I would be hard pressed to think that she didn't know where he was, that she knew what was happening there. So at this point, how is Tom supposed to feel about Daisy? What does Daisy want Nick? How does Daisy want Nick to feel after she tells this story? And after you think about what happened to her, especially at dinner when the mistress calls, answer that question for a moment. How should Nick be feeling right now about Daisy? The other thing that I really want to point out is that she goes on, she sort of gets this emotion from Nick, right? He must be feeling a little bit, give her a little bit of pity. Maybe he sympathizes with her, he feels bad for her. And she does this really great thing. Now remember, her voice is sort of her weapon. So when it's mentioned, especially when she stops trying to make it charming, what we should understand is in this instant, we're seeing sort of the real Daisy behind the charm. The instant her voice broke off, that's such an important line because it's the moment she stops putting on this show. And look at what happens when her voice breaks off. It says, "The instant her voice broke off, ceasing to compel my attention, my belief, I felt the basic insincerity of what she had said." And we should be questioning at this point how hurt really was she? What's the purpose of telling Nick this story? Is it because she really feels these ways? Because she wants something from Nick? She goes on and says, Nick goes on and says, "It made me uneasy, as though the whole evening had been a trick of some sort to exact a contributory emotion from me." That in some way she was doing it on purpose to see what she could get out of him. Remember, we just talked about, what do you do in your life if you can do anything that you want? You get everything that you want. There's nothing else to do. How do you build tension in your own life? We're kind of humans, and we sort of thrive on this tension or sort of this drama. We love drama, right? I guess we do. So how does she create that sort of drama in her life, that sort of that chance to feel something? Because when else would she be able to do it? She, there's no ever near misses in her life where maybe she just had to work so hard and then she finally got something. So because she just gets everything that she wants. So here she is sort of creating this moment to get something from Nick. And I think the most important lines, there's one right up here that says, she rather like Tom's, where Fitzgerald makes a direct comparison between Tom and Daisy, they're one and the same there. And then at the end, this sort of last sentence says, "I waited, and sure enough, in a moment she looked at me with an absolute smirk on her lovely face, as if she had asserted her membership in a rather distinguished secret society to which she and Tom belong." So again, she's coupled with Tom. It's going to be easy for us to forget this moment because in some ways we are going to sympathize with Daisy. Tom is kind of a jerk. So it's going to be easy to not like Tom, and we'll want to, as humans who read a story, we will want to root for a character, and we will want to like Daisy. Our brain will say, "We hate Tom, that must mean we must like Daisy." But I don't want you to forget this moment where she was compared to Tom, that she was similar to Tom here, and that she sort of played Nick. That she got what she wanted out of him. She got a little sympathy. He's siding with her now. She isn't this sort of stupid wife that's too dumb to know her husband is cheating on her, or can't keep her man. Here she's this sort of woman that you should sympathize with and sort of hate Tom. So she got you effectively, Nick, on her side, and in some ways, you, the reader. So we need to be very careful with language in this novel because it's subtle, but every single thing that Fitzgerald puts in there gives us some sort of characterization about who these characters are. And the fun thing, to me anyway, about this novel is that it is such a constant puzzle of being able to piece together all of the words. This is a great novel to be a rereader, for sure. Okay, let's move on back here to the Prezi. Maybe. Come on, you can do it? Oh, it wants to move my thing. Okay. Okay, so we kind of really went through that. And we talked about this to some degree, so hopefully you did. And let's just like re-look at the quote about her voice. It says, there was an excitement in her voice, like this is kind of her power, that men who cared for her found difficult to forget. A singing compulsion, a whispered listen, a promise that she had done gay, exciting things, and gay, exciting things were hovering in the next hour. And we really have to think about through this whole novel is how does Daisy use her voice like a weapon? So really consider that as we keep reading and the situations that Daisy's in and how she's able to use that as her sort of weapon, her sort of power. We get introduced to Tom. Tom, has said that it was described that he peaked in college, which I think is great. Like, the best last thing that he did ever in his life when he was 21. Imagine, people who tell you right now that high school is, the best time of your life. I mean, my God, I hope they're lying to you, because if this is the best time of your life, I mean, seriously, these years, then you're in trouble. Like, I hope this isn't the best time of your life. I hope every year you have in your life is the best year of your life. But Tom peaked in college, which means he's about 30 now. So it means that he's been living for 10 years and it's just been, it's been just going kind of downhill for him. So how does this sort of powerful man who gets everything that he wants deal with this sort of anticlimactic life? Oh, where'd that go? Let's go back. What happened? No. Okay, hold on, let me find it. Ooh, that wasn't so far off. Okay, sorry about that. He's arrogant. He's used to getting his own way. He's a racist. He's sort of stuck in the past. We heard that when he talked about Goddard, and now that we know a little bit about him from watching that Adams Heard Everything, we can kind of see. And he's having an affair, so he's not like the best guy out there. I really love the descriptions in this novel, and here's a description of Tom. It says, 2 shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face and gave him the impression that he was always leaning aggressively forward. The great thing I think about Fitzgerald is the use of language. Take a look at that quote and see if you can find a word that's used more than once. Like maybe it's a different version of the word, but it means the same thing. So see if you can find an example of something that's used over and over again. The word kind of means the same thing, but there's like synonyms of that same word. Can you point them out to your desk mate? Oh, why did I do it? Why? Hopefully you found the word like arrogant. It's kind of the same as dominance, which is kind of the same as aggressively. And we're looking for that. When we're looking at like really densely packed sentences, we're looking for those adjectives, those descriptions, and we're trying to find ones that follow kind of a pattern. Remember, we have that analyze where we're looking at the details, we're looking at the patterns, and we're making some sort of conclusion. We should be able to make some sort of conclusion about Tom based on this description. So Tom, if Daisy uses her voice, Tom really uses his physicality. He gets what he wants by his body, like he can control people through a physical way. And so we want to think about that whenever we see Tom and how he interacts with people and how he uses that. That's sort of his special power, is his physicality. And we get to Jordan, and Jordan she plays golf. She's a possible love interest for Nick. She seems bored with life and gossips. And some of the things that we should really know about Jordan is that she sort of represents the modern beauty, that sort of flapper style. If Daisy represents like the classic beauty, like sort of classically beautiful, the traditional beauty, Jordan is really the modern contemporary. Her name is a boy's name. She has a man's sport, golf. In the 20s it would have been a man's sport. Her name in the 20s would have been a man's name. Her body, we have a great description coming up about what her body looks like, and it's even described in this like really boyish way. So let's take a look at that. I don't know why I do it. I don't know. Why do I do it? Son of a seahorse. Oh, I think we're close. Oh, that was pretty close. Okay. So her description is a slender, small-breasted girl with an erect carriage, which she accented by throwing her body backward at the shoulders like a young cadet. So she's even compared to a young boy. She's slender, she's not curvy at all, and she has the body of a boy, which in the 20s, that flapper style, that's what was popular. So she's really the modern beauty. At the end of the chapter, we are able to finally see Gatsby, but not for very long. We just see this little tiny moment where he is there. He stretched out his arm toward the dark water in a curious way and distinguished a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. So it looks like he's like reaching out for something, and it looks like it's the dock, and there's a green light there. And that's all we get of Gatsby. It's all we know. It's all we see of him. So it's sort of interesting. Now, when we think about the chapter as a whole, and we finally get introduced to Gatsby, and the first thing that Nick tells us about Gatsby is that he represents everything that Nick hates. That he's really new money. But there is something about Gatsby that Nick loves, and he loves that there's this something gorgeous is this extraordinary gift for hope. And we talked a little bit about how hope itself can be negative. It's not always a positive thing. If you have this false hope, or if you're just like constantly think something is going to work out when it's not, could you imagine like always trying for something even though feasibly or realistically it's not possible, like how that could change your life and what you do with it. So there are so many symbols. This book is like, it's like an English teacher's dream, because there are just like so many symbols in here. One of them, I'm going to go through like a couple of them that will track through the rest of this novel. Remember, is a short definition of a symbol in case you've kind of forgot it. But colors are so important. Yellow, it really stands for like money and sort of the tarnished idea that comes with money, that money isn't necessarily good, but it can be corrupt and it can be corrupting. So we always are going to see these sort of references to yellow in lots of different shades, in lots of different ways. So here we have it's red and gold like Newmont, and it's Nick, his plan to make money in the future. So we can see maybe there's some corruption that's behind that in some way. At the Buchanan's, there's a lot of gold that's there. Kind of, it's with Tom to some extent. The eggs themselves are symbols. Right here's kind of a map, because these things do really exist in real life, these little spots. If you were to go like off of Manhattan, kind of follow this, you could go there. They're real places. And this is kind of East Egg and West Egg, and Gatsby and Nick kind of live over here, and Tom sort of lives over there. And so you can kind of see here that they might be able to see each other across the bay there. The houses are symbols. The houses really stand for the people that live in them. Gatsby's house is a factual imitation. It has a spanking new under a thin beard of raw ivy, so it's like very, very new. It was just built. So we can see that gardens haven't had a chance to really grow yet. It's squeezed between, Nick's house is squeezed between two huge mansions, so there's no space that's happening there. I think this is kind of an interesting, it's a factual imitation, it's an oxymoron there, a factual imitation of a Hotel de Ville in Normandy. So that should maybe, if the houses are symbolic to the people that live there, that should give you some indication of Gatsby himself. And then to contrast that, Tom's house, look at the gardens are all growing. It's even more elaborate than Nick had expected. It's bright vines compared to Gatsby's thin beard. There's a lawn that ran toward the front door for a quarter of a mile, so they have so much more space, and it's so much bigger than what Gatsby's really is. White is huge. I mean, white's just everywhere. And white is sort of, we often think about white as representing innocence, but Fitzgerald is really using white to, you know, represent sort of like not innocent, but like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, Daisy's not necessarily innocent. She sort of projects that innocence, but underneath it, she's really kind of corrupted herself. So that, so it's, it's kind of like using it in an ironic way to some extent. And so lots of things around Daisy are constantly described as being white. She's dressed in white. She lives in a white house. The walls are white. White, 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 white. That's, anything and everything you can think about for Daisy. Jordan, Miss Baker is Jordan. That's Jordan's last name. Again, the white dresses. But here's what I really love about this quote. It says, sometimes she and Miss Baker talked at once, unobtrusively, and with a bantering inconsequence that was never quite chatter, that was as cool as their white dresses and their impersonal eyes in the absence of all desire. It just reaffirming or reiterating that they want for nothing. And kind of just re-brings the question up, what do you do, what do you dream of or hope for or want if you already have everything? And how do you live life and go through the little daily details if there isn't anything to look forward to? So we know that Nick is feeling a little bit uneasy at the Buchanan's house. We kind of reread that section towards the end of the chapter 1, and we kind of see that happening there. That he picks up a little bit on Daisy pretending a bit, and he doesn't like that. I'm going to keep that in mind. All right, so last things here. Old money is supposed to be the dream, right? It's well-bred, aristocratic, it's better, but Tom has a mistress and is a racist. Jordan is bored, and Daisy is shallow. At least she wants Nick to believe it. So it's hypocritical to think that you're better because of your old money, do bad things, than hide behind your money or your manners. And that's kind of like a big part of this novel. Like, these characters, Daisy and Tom, use money to such a degree to hide and cover all of the actual bad things that they do. Okay, and that's chapter 1. Chapter 2, you get to go to a house party. Remember, this is the 20s, so it's prohibition, so there's supposed to be no alcohol, but if you have alcohol, it's kind of a sign of wealth because you're able to get it and you can afford it. And so there was alcohol at dinner tonight. There'll be alcohol at the party tomorrow. Everybody gets drunk. Something very fishy happens at the end of chapter 2, so read that part carefully, and we can discuss that tomorrow. Okay. Happy reading.